Hey guys, what's up? Penguin Pat here, and today I'm going to do something just a little bit different than what I usually do. I'm going to do a tier list for the great buildings of Forge of Empires. Since this is new, I just want to see how you guys like it. So if you like it, like and subscribe. If I get, let's call it 500 likes. No, let's make it 400. If I get 400 likes, I will do another tier list. Please comment down below what other type of tiers you would like to see. Do you want to see ages, units, unit special abilities, whatever it is? If there's some sort of tier list that you want to see for Forge of Empires, leave it in the comments below, and that will let me know that this is an idea that you want to see coming. All right, so with all that said, how are we going to rate these great buildings? Because we've got a lot of great buildings here to pick. And I'm basically going to first rank, obviously, on just pure functionality and must-haveness, if must-haveness is a word. The most must-have buildings will obviously go in the S, and we will go down from there. I will put a little bit of weight on aesthetics, but only a little bit. And aside from that, there might be a few buildings that are going to be controversial or dependent upon playstyle, and I might rate those a little bit better than you might expect, primarily because it is a playstyle-based building. So with no further ado, let's get started. Actually, one last thing before we get started. Let's talk about what each of the tiers mean. So S tier is going to be the great buildings that really you can just level to the moon. There's not really an end point as to where these great buildings should stop leveling, because you actually continue to benefit from them. And even though you get hit with diminishing returns, they're still just so good, it's worth it to keep taking them up well past 100. The A tier we're going to call great buildings that are absolutely must-have great buildings, and we recommend leveling them to 100, maybe higher. But the thing is that once you start getting up in that 90 to 100 range, they start becoming so cost prohibitive to level that even though they're must-have great buildings, at that point, leveling is just a luxury. It's not a must-have. All right, so B tier is going to be great buildings that are they're not like so must have that you just can't play the game without them, but they're basically the best optional great buildings that you can have, and almost on the borderline of must have. But they also have a cap. Like, these are great buildings that really, taking them up much past their prime spot, really starts to become cost prohibitive. Meaning, like, there's certain great buildings where there's cutovers, like the Space Carrier or the Blue Galaxy, where when you hit the cutover, then continuing to level up more, it doesn't really get you anything because you're not getting more charges. It's just not worth having. So those are where the B is. You really cap those out at about 80. Much higher than that, there's no point in going there. All right, C tier is going to be either disposable great buildings or great buildings that are very niche focused, like it requires a specific style of play in order for them to be useful, and otherwise they're not worth having. They are the first level of completely optional great buildings. D is what I would consider to be fully optional great buildings. They are entirely they're not necessary. I wouldn't even consider them good. They're just if you're going to put in some great buildings, maybe they're great buildings that if you've already leveled, then I wouldn't necessarily delete them, but let's put it this way. If you only had them at level 10, I would delete them. If you had them at level 60, I would consider keeping them. And I'm not even sure about that. It just kind of depends. A lot of these I would still delete anyway. And then F, I would just delete. It doesn't matter what level they are. If you leveled them to the moon, you could have them at level 180, 190, 200. I would still delete them because they're that bad. So let's just start. I guess we're just going alphabetical order. Seems to make sense to me. So let's start with Alcatraz. Alcatraz is obviously S tier. This is a almost required great building. If you were going to be doing mass fights, Alcatraz is absolutely one of the most important buildings in the game. And especially with the way that power creep has come along, and the fact that you can get attack from special buildings, that has made this building even more essential and has made some of these other buildings less valuable. So Traz, absolutely S tier, no question about it. The next one is going to be Arctic Orangery. And this one, I kind of have been back and forth between the number one for the A tier or the number two for S tier, or not number two, but the second one that I'm putting in S tier. And I'm going to put it in S tier for right now for one main reason, and that is because it opens the door for so much much better fighting in general, right? There are obviously some limitations because the units have to be of the same age, but it's excellent for battlegrounds. It's excellent for GE. It's excellent for your guild versus guild. So just any sort of fighting, it's going to be really, really helpful. And on top of that, it opens the door for one-shot kills, and it also gives you the ability to get around pesky things like reactive armor. Absolutely one of the best great buildings, probably the best offensive great building in the game, better than even Zeus or COA, CDM, any of that stuff. Moving on to the Atlantis Museum. Now, the Atlantis Museum is kind of a weird creature because there are certain playstyles that can make this building pretty dang good. And I'm kind of back and forth between C and D. I'm going to start it in D, and I might bump it up depending on how this goes. And the main reason why I'm kind of on the fence with this, I'm going to pull this over here, is that this building can technically be really good. I mean, if you're up here in this like 40% range for doubling, and you're attacking your neighborhood every single day and you are looking for those plunders every single day, then you can theoretically make this great building work for you and actually give you some of the best forge point per square of anything. Now that we have trains with these long train cars, we've got the hippodromes, there's all sorts of different things that you can hit that will double up and get you huge rips, right? So those are definitely things that can make this great building great. But the downside is that it also is going to really make it so that people just don't like you. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're plundering everyone in your hood, that's going to affect your reputation. And at some point, you may want to be friends with these people. At some point, you may not want to always be a hunter. You might want to become a gatherer. And if that's the case, the Atlantis Museum is going to hurt you. And that's kind of why I have it down in D. I see the potential. The other thing is that it does give goods as a secondary bonus. And that is actually a little bit underrated sometimes, especially as you get into the higher ages. Those extra goods can be a little bit handy. But the fact that this is a big, great building, it is 42 squares, that's the big killer. All right, Atomium. Atomium, I'm going to put squarely in B. Now, this is one that has only recently really started shooting up the list because prior to Battlegrounds, Atomium was not really necessary. The Ark completely handled all of your goods for your guild need, and frankly, once you got past Future Era, you had even less of an issue with keeping your goods up and all that, because obviously you don't have guild versus guild for Arctic Future and above, right? There's no specific age for that. So there wasn't really anything for you to spend your goods on. Now that we have Battlegrounds, that has really helped to boost Atomium up the list quite a bit, primarily because this helps you to quickly and passively keep your reserves coming in and keeps you building goods. Now, can you make way more goods using something like the chateau, or even your colony can produce a ton of goods? But the passive aspect of it is absolutely awesome. And these are especially huge for things like new guilds on brand new servers. Brand new servers, this building is amazing because treasuries aren't built up from years of collecting. So the faster you can build up, and then even when new ages come out, that's always a challenge, especially for the first couple of weeks. Keeping the goods to keep your battlegrounds funded is not always easy to do, especially if all of your people in that age, all of your top players age up at the same time. It can be really expensive, and having that Atomium there to help rapidly build up your treasury in a new age is really useful. Moving on to Babel. Now, Babel definitely has something going for it in the fact that it is a relatively small building at only 16 squares. It's not particularly expensive to level, and it does give you those happy, unrefined goods. And those unrefined goods, again, are very helpful, especially once you start getting into Virtual Future and above. That means that you're going to be getting, if you're in Virtual Future, that means that you're getting Future Era goods. And as you go up, you're getting those higher age goods, even really in Future, especially if your guild participates in Guild versus Guild, getting postmodern era goods is really nice in a passive way. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that Guild Battlegrounds has really chewed up the reserves of early age goods. When I started and there wasn't Battlegrounds, early age goods barely got used, right? You used them to build great buildings and that was it. And you didn't really burn through them heavily in GVG because most of the fighting in guild versus guild happens in the higher eras. Usually contemporary and up was kind of my experience. And you didn't really have a major drain in those earlier ages. Well, now because of Battlegrounds, you can have your early age treasuries get wrecked. So those unrefined goods actually are becoming more and more scarce and a lot more useful than previously accounted for. Now, the population from Babel is garbage. This I would not recommend for an early age player. This is specifically useful for a higher age player to produce those unrefined goods, and I would definitely put it near the bottom of the list for leveling. But if you're just if you're only logging in a few times a day to collect and reset, there may be a home for it. Now, this one is a hard one. Cape Canaveral is one of the most debated great buildings in the game right now because, well, it is technically one of the best, if not the best, pure forge point per square buildings. Now, obviously, when you're looking at something like the Ark, that supersedes any of that and gives you way more forge points per square once you start using it right. But just on a pure forge point per square 24-hour collection basis, it's really hard to beat Cape. And for that reason, I have to put Cape relatively high on the list because forge points are still a thing. Now, with that said, one mistake that a lot of players make is they get too excited to put Cape in too early. And what I mean by that is players will try to get a Cape in before they've gone and leveled their Ark. And let me tell you right now, that's going to slow you down. It's going to take longer for you to reach the max age if that's what you do. And here I'm going to go ahead and jump over to this is a baby city that I just started out. And if you look at this, let's see, FOE Helper has this really neat thing where you can have a look and see what great building you should level first. And you can see here that Cape Canaveral takes 251 days to break even, right? And that's assuming that you buy the goods. Let's cut the cost to buy the goods down, right? So we're looking at 250 days to break even. And don't get me wrong, that is a really fast break-even time frame for a great building, right? That is definitely a very respectable fast time. I'm always looking to be at a break-even within a year, because you don't know how long you're going to be playing. You don't know how the game's going to change. So that makes it good. But at the same time, keep in mind that after 250 days, your Ark should already be level 80. If your Ark isn't at level 80, after 250 days, you're doing something wrong, which means that by leveling Cape first or doing anything with Cape first, you're actually slowing down your progress for the Ark. The other thing is, and you can't see it here, is that the break-even time is actually very, very slow to break even at lower levels of Cape. It's not until you go through level 40 to 60 where you really make up ground and start really racking up the efficiency for Cape. So unless you're ready to take Cape all the way to level 61 or whatever that most efficient time frame is, don't put Cape in because that's just not the right time. And for just a quick tiny bit of visual interest, this is a quick days to break even on your Cape. And here you can see that, going up to level 5 or level 6, okay, these are okay, right? And I suppose if you get the goods for free and some people are going to if your guild gives you some sticks to bricks, that could be good. But keep in mind, again, you really want to be putting all your focus to Ark so that you can start making forge point sniping. And as you can see here, if you only level to level 10, that's just murder on your days to break even. And if you stop here in the 20s or 30s, oh man, you've really lost out. It's all here in these 40s and 50s where you have such a low net cost to level. This column right here is net cost to level, and it's it's less than 100 forge points to level. Heck yeah, that's worth it. But until you're prepared to crank through those levels, that's really not helping you that much. So with that said, definitely pass on doing Cape until your Ark is level 80 or higher. Moving on to Capital. Now, Capital is going to go in F, and that's just a quick decision. It's not even hard. you never really get the population per square. Actually, I'm gonna jump it up to D, and I'll tell you why. So the capital never really gets to a really solid population per square like some of the other population great buildings, and it does give coins, which is nice, and it's really a niche thing. It's good for early age campers, or players that don't have the budget to buy a innovation tower or a habitat, something like that. So, and in early ages, the population per square is actually quite respectable. So for like a secondary city, that can actually be kind of handy, but getting the blueprints is really hard. So it's not really a great building that you would ever build except for very niche scenarios. And for that reason, I'm putting it in D, because there are a few niche outlier scenarios. Otherwise, it's F, and that's it. So if I could put it in between D and F, I would. I can't, so there we go. All right, moving along to the Cathedral of Aachen. Now, this great building is one of the Fighting Trinity, the Fighting Trio, whatever you want to call it, and I rate it as the second best of the trio. It is cheap to level. It is a smaller footprint than your CDM in more than one way. First of all, it's only 24 squares. Second of all, because it's rectangle, it has a short side of only 4 squares instead of 5 squares, which means that you have less necessary road to connect it. So that gives this a much better footprint, so to speak. In theory, you're looking at only 26 squares versus looking at 27 and a half squares with your CDM. And it is significantly cheaper to level, which is a big factor for me. I'm not so much looking at the forge points per day, because of sniping, and battlegrounds can be a really great way to cover the forge points. We'll do a whole nother video on forge points per day versus other stuff. But the bottom line is that this is a must-have building. It's not completely broken, but it is a must-have building, and it is awesome. Definitely want a Cathedral of Aachen. Moving on to this one being St. Basil's Cathedral. And this one is garbage. There's no reason to build this great building ever for any reason at all. City defense is pointless. I understand that in early ages you may be getting plundered left and right. That's just part of the game. Collect on time, and that's it. Some people say, hey, this gives some GVG support pool, and if you don't do guild versus guild, your guild doesn't do guild versus guild, then that doesn't mean anything anyway. I would love to see Forge add some extra use for support pool. But with that said, the amount of support pool that the SBC gives you, that the St. Basil's Cathedral gives you, is really minor compared to what you get from Observatory. So it's really not worth it. Okay, like that's just an excuse. It's one of the more attractive great buildings. I like it. It looks awesome. I wish it was a more useful great building, but at the end of the day, it's not worth having. Now, the Castel del Monte is obviously one of the most popular great buildings in the game, and a lot of players consider it to be the best fighting building in the game, or at least the best attack percentage fighting building in the game. I disagree with that. A lot of people look at the forge points that you get from it, and they immediately assume that makes it better than the others. But I'm going to make a quick case that it's not necessarily the best. And the reason why, first of all, is that the footprint is significantly bigger. At 25 squares, plus having a long side of 5, means that it does take up a lot of space. Also, it is so significantly more expensive to level. When you look at the cost to level, say from 0 to 59, for Zeus, you're looking at about 11,000. For your Aachen, you're looking at about 12,700 forge points to level. And then you look at your Monte, and you're looking at 15.5. That's a pretty big difference, right? I mean, you're not looking at, it's not quite 50% more forge points to level, but it's close, right? And your Zeus is only 6 squares, whereas your CDM is 25 squares. That's a really big difference, okay? And when you start looking at these higher levels, you're going from like 91 to 92, or, here we're talking about, what is this, over 600 forge points difference, right? Or excuse me, over 500 forge points difference between those two. And that's about a 50% increase in cost, right? It's 50% more forge points to level your Castel del Monte versus your Zeus. So with that said, it is obviously a must-have great building. I just think that Zeus is better. Moving on, we have the Chateau Frontenac. And CF Chateau is one of the most, if not, it's one of the most broken great buildings in the game. And when you pair that with the Ark, it becomes even better. And it is so powerful for recurring quests. Obviously, Inno has had to change multiple things in the game recently because because CF has become so powerful. There was even a way of getting what they call perpetual motion, where literally you could do recurring quests an unlimited number of times and never run out of resources to do that. It was basically just how much time you had to do recurring quests. That was really possible and doable in Iron Age and in Tomorrow Era. Totally broken, right? So for that reason, we saw the 2,000 abort limit added because this great building is so broken. It is amazing for generating coins, supplies, goods, whatever it is. I have a video on how to make unlimited goods, and that is all based on your Chateau Frontenac. I would say that at the end of the day, Traz is more essential than Chateau, but I think Chateau is more broken, so to speak. All right, some quick ones right here. We have the Colosseum. It's garbage. Not only is it huge, but it doesn't give you anything useful. It's garbage. I'm not going to waste any time with it. Same thing here with Deal Castle. It has the same problem as the St. Basil's Cathedral, and that is that it's useless. I mean, city defense is useless. I'm not going to waste any more time with that. Moving on. Now, for those of you who have been watching this channel for a while and know how uncultured I am, you must have been laughing when you saw this great building coming up because you know I'm horrified of mispronouncing some of these amazing historic buildings in the game. So the Frauenkirche of Dresden is horrifying to me because I don't speak German at all, obviously, and I'm sure I butchered that so badly. But nevertheless, the FD, the Frauenkirche of Dresden, is not a very great building. I'm going to put it here kind of near the bottom of the D category. Any great building that is unrefined goods has a little bit of purpose. It's not a total F, but the happiness that you get from it is not worth building. This is a building that is entirely, basically the main reason why you put it in your city is because it looks beautiful. And if you are a once per day collect and reset player, if you are an active, proactive player, there is absolutely no reason to have this building in your city. Moving on to the Flying Noob Trap. Yes, the Flying Island. And this one is probably my favorite looking great building in the game. The Ark is maybe the only other one that's in the range of that, and the Orangery's up there too. But as much as I love the look of this, I was so disappointed to find out how not useful this great building was. Now, I am going to put it here in D, and I'll tell you why. Now, when you compare this to the Temple of Relics, the Temple of Relics is superior in so many ways. The biggest things that are hurting the Flying Island are, one, it takes a crap ton of goods, and they're Venus goods on top of that. So that alone just makes it expensive. The second thing is that because it is a Venus great building, that means that it's just expensive to level. I mean, just bottom line, it's expensive to level. And then what you get from that is basically the same thing that you get from Temple of Relics, except at a lower pace. So with that said, there are a few fringe cases for this. And actually, I would call this, this is sort of a super duper uber ultra advanced strategy, and it's really only for players that already are experienced in the game and they know what they're doing. And on top of that, if they have somebody who can give them the goods. Now, if somebody can give you the goods for this great building, it actually makes sense to level this bad boy, not to just level 1, but let's say level 3, right? I mean, going up past level 3 doesn't really make sense, but going to level 3, you could actually sort of justify it as long as you're not having to pay for the goods, right? I mean, going from level 1 to level 3, you get up here to a total of 6.5 daily forge points, and that's on a 24 square building. So that is better than a quarter of a forge point per square, or rather, you are spending less than 4 squares per forge point. And that is pretty good. Plus, you have some of the other things that you get, like the Reno kits and rogues and units and whatnot. So, with that said, that is literally the only reason why you should put that in your city, is if you have somebody who will give you the goods. Otherwise, it's not worth building, right? So this, again, would be the type of thing where if you were friends with somebody on another server and they said, hey, why don't you come over to my server, re-roll your city, we'll help to boost you and get you moved up fast, then I could see adding that as a way to add some forge points. You have it nice, sticks to bricks, somebody covers the cost of leveling it to level 3, cool. Taking it past level 3, no point. Right. The other nice thing is that if you do pick up some extra reno kits or whatever, sort of building type stuff like that, then that makes it a little bit handy. Overall, though, unless you're just putting it in your city to look at it, don't build it. Yeah. All right. Statue of Gaea statue. I don't know. It's garbage, man. It's hot garbage. It's a happiness building. It wastes goods that could be used for building Arctic orangeries. Let's just hide. It's not, it's a mess. All right. Galata Tower. Now, this one actually was better at first and has gotten worse. And the reason why it has gotten worse is because the cost to level has been increased significantly for this great building. When it first came out, it was much cheaper, and for whatever reason, NO felt it necessary to bump the cost up from what it was to a much higher cost, and that really hurt this one. With that said, you still have the most goods per square of any of the unrefined goods producing buildings, and for that reason, I'm going to give it a C. Right, that's still useful. A 3x3, you can fit it anywhere. The nice small profile, and the plundering benefit might seem like a big deal, but I really don't consider that to be useful. At the end of the day, it's not really saving you that many forge points, and what it costs to level it is certainly never going to be offset by any other aspect of it. So it's just hot garbage. All right. Now, moving on to another great building that I know a lot of you are excited to hear me pronounce. Yes, we're looking at the Hagia Sophia. Now, you may hear it called the Hagia Sophia or the Hagia Sophia or just HS. But my understanding is it's pronounced Hagia Sophia. And with that said, this great building goes right about here. That's about as high as I can put it. So this was a great building that was really popular before power creep went to the moon, and before we had battlegrounds and stuff like that, because this is a fairly cheap great building to level, and you do at some point get a decent forge point per square from it, but at the end of the day, this great building really just doesn't stack up. You look here at the most efficient path on this. Here, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So your best bet with this is right here. You get up to 27, almost 28 forge points per day, and you're looking at over a year to break even, and that's on a gigantic great building, right? I mean, it is 7x6, so you're looking at 42 squares, and that's one that you'll dead end it into. So the road shouldn't be as big of a deal, but that's just, you're not even at a forge point every 2 squares, and with power creep and all, it's just not that good anymore. It's just not. There's no justification for having that in your city, in my opinion. I almost have to put it in F. I know that's going to kill people to see, but I actually can see more fringe cases of some of these other great buildings than having that in your city like that. So I'll put it in D, because if I don't, other people are going to scream. For those of you who have been watching the channel for a while, you know that the Himeji Castle has been a nightmare for me, and I will actually literally avoid saying it if at all possible. And I've actually even had people argue in comments about how to pronounce it, but I believe it's pronounced the Himeji Castle. Nevertheless, this is absolutely one of the best great buildings in the game. I almost put it above the attack buildings, but I can't. But it's definitely a tier A. It's definitely a must-have great building for a variety of reasons. So first and foremost, the supplies that this thing gives you are absolutely insane. Here, even in these early levels where you're getting several 100,000 supplies, is insanely broken for early age players. It allows you to do recurring quests. It allows you to rush research. It allows you to stockpile supplies in a way that you couldn't even with doing recurring quests with Chateau. It helps you to just, totally get loaded up on those supplies. So if you ever decide to do a big age jump, like say you're trying to jump from Iron Age to Future or from progressive to Future or something like that, this great building makes it so much easier than having to stockpile those supplies for that jump, doing other things like regular production runs or even recurring quests. And then on top of that, even once you start getting into higher ages and whatnot, just the consistent several million supplies at a time is actually really handy. If you haven't dealt with a settlement before and you don't know how these colonies work, it's expensive. Like to reset one of these things is several 100,000, right? You're looking at $500,000 for every one of these. If you can do 12 of them or however many that you have in your city, man, that adds up fast and that can drain your supplies really quick. So with that said, the supplies that you get from it should not be discounted. Obviously, recurring quest, Chateau, way more supplies, especially as you get to higher ages, but it's still really good for that. Second of all, the forge points per square are legit. Like you're looking at 76.3, so basically 76 forge points at level 58, which is really, really good. And that doesn't even count the goods, the rogues, all the other stuff that you get from that. You're looking at more than 2 forge points per square, which is, that is way better than most of the great building offerings that you have available. So with that said, this is absolutely easily a top tier great building. Moving on to the Inno Tower. Now, Inno Tower, I'm going to put up here in the B section. And the reason why it goes in B is because it's a little bit niche these days. Before, the forge point per square for this was quite good. The cost to level it was very low for great buildings. Is one of the best ROIs for great buildings because it was so cheap to level. And the population is awesome. One thing about the population that a lot of people don't realize is that having barracks, having goods buildings, things like that, there's actually a really strong case for doing that, especially if you are on a brand new server or something like that. Being able to crank goods, like if you can crank future era goods and you don't have a crap load of people who are sitting in future era, those goods are worth a ton. Like you can sell arc sets for 1,000 forge points a pop on a brand new world, maybe even more than that. That's huge. And by having extra population, that means that you can build more goods buildings and so on. It also just helps you to be more self-sufficient. And then, I've done a whole video on barracks and forge points per day and Traz. I might do another one. But, keep in mind that population does have its advantages. Like if you look here, based on the barracks that I have in my city right now, I can be making, and this is just a rough estimate, 375 units per day. And I'd actually be doing more than that, but this is just a quick ballpark. Now, if you compare that to somebody who only has their Traz and they're only doing 117 a day, I'm doing more than 3 times the amount of units per day as they are. And I'm not even I don't even have archers in my city right now, I could switch all these great buildings, or not all these great buildings, all these barracks out to be current age buildings for units, if that was what my goal was. Whole point being that population is definitely useful, especially if you are a guild versus guild player, or if you are an extremely high volume competitive battlegrounds fighter. If you're not extremely high volume fighter, if you're not constantly pushing the envelope and running out of units, then that population isn't quite as useful. But I'm still going to put it in B because I'm just like that. All right, moving on to the Lighthouse of Alexandria. And I'm going to put that right here in C, and it goes there for a variety of reasons. First of all, especially for an early age player just getting started, the lighthouse is absolutely extremely useful. You can see that in all of my early age cities, I have a lighthouse because that extra supply boost is huge. Now, obviously, if you have access to a Himeji Castle, that is superior to the lighthouse. But the lighthouse, that extra boost for supplies for an early age player is absolutely game changing. It makes such a big difference for early age players. but I consider it to be a disposable great building. Especially once you have a Himeji Castle, there's not really a need for this for the supplies, and the amount of goods that you get from it are not really anything to note about. It's nothing to write home about. Once you get to the higher ages again, then it kind of circles back up and becomes useful. So you might want to rebuild it, but that in between time, it's not nearly as useful. Now, I would be lying to you if a few of these great buildings I didn't stare at in terror, almost forgetting what they were called because I'm not fresh on it. But this Lotus Temple, though it's an attractive great building, is garbage. It's happiness, and that it's not really happiness. It really should be sadness because it's bad. You should have negative happiness for having that great building. And moving on to the Notre Dame, or I don't know. Anyhow, this one is again a sadness building. It's sad because it's happiness, and the happiness is sadness. There's even in early ages, all these happiness buildings are completely outclassed by even just the regular happiness buildings, cultural buildings available in those ages. It's garbage. Okay, so there's no reason to build it unless you're a great building collector, and that's it. One exception is obviously Traz. Traz actually gives you a respectable amount of happiness, but you're not building Traz for the happiness. All right, moving on to Observatory. Observatory gets to be on the A list. Extremely affordable, great building to level. You get amazing, it actually literally gives you the most goods per square of any great building that I could think of, because you're getting so many of the goods of your age, right? And it's only 9 squares. I mean, the only one that could be competitive might be like a really high level arc, but it's great for that. And then for guilds that do guild versus guild, you got to say the support pool is better than any of the other support pool great buildings, and it does add up. You have a whole guild with tons of fully leveled observatories. That's really nice. And I will say, if you have a level 80 arc, level 60 observatory, level 60 atomium, that basically makes Guild Battlegrounds sustainable without having to ask for massive donations from players. So Observatory, definitely level that before Atomium. It is an excellent great building. All right, moving on. Oracle of Delphi. Oracle of Delphi. Oracle. We just call it Oracle because that's the deal. And Oracle is one of those great buildings that I list as garbage. Now, I've had so many newbies message me and say, "Well, I have an Oracle, and it's been so good for me, and I've gotten so much happiness and supplies." And I will tell you that whoever leveled it wasted their forge points. You should have waited until you built like a statue of Zeus and had them put those forge points on the statue of Zeus instead of wasting forge points on your Oracle. Your happiness per square sucks. Your supplies per square sucks. You would be better to just build regular vanilla buildings straight out of the build menu than you would to put this great building in your city. It should be called a lousy building because that's what it is. Moving on to the Rainforest Project. Now, Rainforest Project is another great building that has really, really nice overall group of goods, right? This is a great building that gives you unrefined goods. And one of the nice things about this one is that it's actually pretty cheap to level. Because prior to ARC, Inno didn't really have a good understanding of the cost of leveling great buildings and whatnot. And just the way that things would level between level 30 and 60, that makes the Rainforest Project a particularly inexpensive great building to level. The other thing is that it can be a niche use when a new age, just comes out, and getting that first blueprint or getting those first couple of blueprints for a brand new great building is actually really helpful. If you never experienced the release of a new great building, let me tell you right now, if you are one of the first people to get a blueprint and you're one of the first people to build that great building, you will have people falling over like morons trying to become your friend and trying to get blueprints from you. So it's a niche thing. And for that reason, I do rank it as one of the higher D level. It's still not very good. Okay, Royal Albert Hall. Now, this one's one that's probably going to be controversial for a lot of people because for the majority of situations, this is not a very good great building. It's extremely big, right? And it's not super cheap to level, and it's just it's sort of niche. And you have the Himeji Castle, which obviously outclasses the secondary bonus of the supply boost. However, especially with new worlds that have just recently opened, I would say give the Royal Albert Hall a second look. And let me tell you why. Especially when you don't have access to high level arcs and high level Chateau Frontenacs and Himeji castles everywhere. Supplies are a major bottleneck to research and tech. And realistically, you're going to have a hard time cranking out the massive supplies that you need to rush the tech tree. And especially on early age worlds, or on early worlds that aren't super developed, getting to those higher ages and being able to sell goods is a broken strategy. I mean, the amount of forge points that you can get from selling goods, I will end up having to make a separate video on because it is so overpowered. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I think that the Royal Albert Hall is underrated exclusively and specifically for newer servers where there is not a plethora of high age goods floating around and ability to quickly generate supplies like you can with all of the great buildings and the synergy between Chateau and Arc and so on and so on. All right, gonna keep moving. Seed Vault. I am not a Seed Vault fan. I almost put it in F. I'm not going to put it in F. It looks like, I'm even going to bump a couple of these up a little bit just because I'm obviously putting way too many of them in D. The thing about Seed Vault is that it's kind of expensive to level, and a lot of people say, oh, well, Pat, I can get diamonds from Seed Vault. Yay! And the reality is the supplies that you get from it aren't that great. Himeji way outclasses it. The goods that you get from it are totally outclassed by Chateau, and the amount of time and effort that it takes to go through and aid everyone every day makes this really rough. Now, if they added an aid all building or an aid all button and you could just aid all 140 of your friends and your guild and your neighborhood, bam, 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 then that would significantly increase the value of Seed Vault to me. But at the end of the day, it's just taking up space, and it's taking up valuable forge points that could be used for attack. Right? It doesn't help you to fight better. And things like goods are really easy to generate when you've got the Chateau, when you've got Arc, when you can do tons of fighting. It's just not worth it, right? And you've got your Observatory. You have so many other ways to make those goods that it's just not as valuable to me. Moving on, Space Carrier. The Space Carrier is it's like kind of at the end of A, bottom of B. I have to put it in B, and the only reason why I'm putting it in B instead of A is because it's the main value from Carrier doesn't really kick into effect until you hit Arctic Future. So let me explain that a little bit more. As you probably already know, one of the things that Space Carrier gives you are special goods. And prior to Arctic Future, you only get medals for that, and the medals that you get for it are insignificant. It's not that useful. But the special good is a major bottleneck getting through Arctic Future and Oceanic Future. It is like, seriously, if you haven't been through that, it is one of the worst grinds in the game because it takes so long to acquire those special goods. And this great building dramatically reduces the amount of time that it takes for you to grind those goods. One of the most common things that we see people doing is they will camp out in Future and hesitate to move on. But once they do move on, they'll take their Space Carrier and they will power level maybe 30 levels straight out of the gate to get through Arctic Future. And then once they move to Oceanic Future, power level another several, maybe to, we'll say like 58, that's the efficiency range, because that really cuts down on the amount of time that you have to spend in these really slow going ages. When you're first getting started making Promethium and or a Calcum, or Calcum, I don't know how to say it, but the Oceanic special good, right? You're only looking at like getting like 50 or 60 a day. So you're literally cutting, like you could cut a week or two off of the amount of time that you're stuck in Oceanic. And trust me, like every week that you spend in Oceanic, you're losing thousands of forge points from fighting because it is that bad, right? If you're a major Battlegrounds fighter, it can genuinely cost you like hundreds, if not thousands of forge points for every week that you're stuck in Oceanic. And the quicker you get out Oceanic, And the quicker you get out of virtual and Arctic, the faster you're back to making tons of forge points. Now, the other thing that is really interesting about this great building is that it has like some really serious forge point per square, right? Now, just like the space carrier, your forge point per square, or your forge points that you get at level 58 is legit. 76 forge points at level 58, that's really solid, you know? But the other thing about this building is that it is smaller than the Himeji Castle. You're looking at 28 squares instead of 36, which means you're looking at you're looking at like 2 3/4, like 2.7 forge points per square. That is really, really good, right? I mean, that's almost up there in the same range as your cape, but you also have the extra benefit of getting the special good, you know, the sixth good, and then you're also kind of picking up some rogues here and there. You're picking up some diamonds. You even have the selection kits. So on top of that, and goods, right? So there are so many extra things that you get from this. It is absolutely one of the best great buildings in the game. However, with that said, obviously, it's not as useful until you hit that Arctic future. Moving on to another great building that most of you won't recognize, we're looking at the Space Needle. I didn't even remember that it was modern era because it's such garbage. It is a sadness building because it makes me sad. In fact, you actually lose happiness by putting this in your city if you had to delete a cultural building to put it in. That's how bad it is. All right, moving on to the next great building. And the Stargazer is one of those great buildings that is kind of interesting because I hear a lot of people debating about how it's useful, especially because of battlegrounds and all that. But at the end of the day, you're getting a good that is one age previous, but the cost to level this thing is really, really high. It's a space age Mars building. It's just not good. It's just not good. It's not. I mean, it's small. It's not a big, great building, but it's just not good. I can't justify building it in almost any case. I mean, it's not totally worthless, but it's close. Zeus. Zeus is the king of the fighting buildings. I'm going to put it right there where it belongs at the top of the A tier. Now, a lot of people may argue and they may say, Pat, you know, the Castel del Monte is better because it gives you forge points. And I would argue back and saying, yes, and it also costs 50% more to level, and it's 21 more squares, and it takes more road, right? 6 squares, okay? So you could put a whole nother thing next to it, right? With that 6 squares, you could put, yeah. I'm not going to rant. I'm just going to say, if you have any question about which is the best, okay, let's just look at forge point, or not forge point. Let's look at attack per square, right? You have a building that is only 6 squares versus 25 squares. That's 20%, whatever, you know? It's so much better on a per square basis than these other two buildings. It's such a good, great building. I'm sorry to anyone who didn't see that, but that's what it is. All right, moving on to the next one. And it's a must-have. And it's early age. You can get it in. It doesn't matter whether it's a secondary world, whether it's your main world. You can put it in any world. It's easy to squeeze in. There's just so much about it that makes it good. I'm singing the praises. It's awesome. All right, St. Mark's Basilica. And I'm going to put that right here in the C category. And the reason why is because, again, this is one of those great buildings that, especially before you get your Ark and your Chateau up and cranking, can be really helpful. Getting those extra coins for buying forge points is really nice. I know that sometimes there's a bottleneck. Brand new worlds where there's not a ton of advanced players, this will help you to quickly build up those coins that you need for research. A lot of times, especially in events like the archaeology event or the Halloween event, where you have to buy a ton of coins for the quest. You know, a lot of times those artifacts require you to buy 5 forge points, buy 5 forge points. By the end of the event, you bought 100 forge points or more, right? And that really starts to add up for your cost. So being able to get those extra coins is really handy. And I know that when I first built this building way back when, I didn't think I was going to like it as much, and I ended up liking it way more than I expected that I would. With that said, with both the lighthouse and the St. Mark's Basilica, I would not recommend leveling these past like 4 or 5. You're not really getting that much benefit when you start cranking it up, unless you're really cranking it to the moon in higher H's. And I consider it to be a disposable great building. Build those while you're getting your arc leveled to make sure that you have the supplies, the coins that you need, the resources that you need. Once you've got your arc and your chateau cranking, at that point, then these become disposable. You can get rid of them. And then when you get to higher ages and those unrefined goods start being more valuable, then you can rebuild it. Especially if you only leveled to like 5 or 6 the first time, rebuilding it isn't as much of a sting. Okay, Temple of Relics. This is going to be a building that I'm sure I'm going to hear some grumbling about and it's kind of controversial, but I'm going to put it, they're at the bottom of the B tier. It might even be higher than that. I don't know. So this is one of those. No, it's higher. It's got to be higher. I'm going to put it like almost at the top. Now, hear me out, because I'm sure a lot of you are like, dude, Pat, this is not very many forge points per square and good. Blah, blah, blah. This building straight saves you diamonds. That's it. That, like, don't think of it as anything except for a diamond producing building. Let me explain. If you need one-up kits, reno kits, or store buildings, you can spend diamonds to get those during events. You can spend diamonds to buy those when they come up as special deals or whatever. You get a couple of them from doing dailies, and if you complete 7 dailies, you might occasionally see one flutter through the antique dealer. But like when you need to upgrade 30, 40, 50 buildings as you age up, it's really hard to get all of those one-up kits and all of those reno kits without either spending a crap load of diamonds or without Temple of Relics. Now, if you are a diamond buyer, if you are a cash player and you have spent a ton of money getting diamonds and you have spent a ton of money cranking through events and you have a lot of banked up store buildings, one-up kits, reno kits, by all means, this great building is not for you. Like there is a purpose for it, but especially for a free to play player, look no further than Temple of Relics. It's cheap to level, and with that said, to start with, you only need to level it to like 4 or 5. You just want to start getting it, and let's talk about the other thing about it. In the event that you do hit the jackpot with a terrace farm or some Sacred Skywatches as a beginning player, like that's a big thing. If Temple of Relics can give you a 5 forge point per day building once every couple of months as a beginning player, that's a really big payout, especially if you end up having extra the inevitable having extra terrace farm upgrade kits sitting in your city, sitting in your inventory. At that point, it's giving you a 12 forge point building, right? Just out of nowhere. It's awesome. Temple of Relics is actually one of the more underrated great buildings, in my opinion. With that said, once you're all maxed out, all that, you might end up wanting to maybe delete it. I don't know. I keep mine in. I love that I have it. I love having tons of store buildings. So if I want to do crazy stuff with my city, like store my entire cherry set, I don't have to freak out and wonder if I made the right decision or not. I almost left out one of the main ways that the Temple of Relics is basically a diamond producing building, and that is the antique dealer. You see, normally a lot of these buildings, if you didn't have the antique dealer, the only way that you could get more of them is spending diamonds in the event or buying them during like a Black Friday sale or something like that, where it costs you 2 or 3 or 4,000 diamonds to get these upgrades. Like, for example, I know that I am 1 upgrade short of a Governor's Villa selection kit, and I have more coin and gems than I really care about, and my city's already basically decked out, but I wanted to get that one last upgrade for the Governor's Villa. I could go and get that, right? And I didn't have to spend diamonds to do it. If I didn't have Temple of Relics, I wouldn't have the coins or the whatever I need in order to buy these upgrades. So in this case, the Temple of Relics was essentially a diamond producing building. It kept me from having to spend diamonds to get this last upgrade or however many upgrades. And same thing with the rest of my city. That's how I got all my Royal Marble Gateways. That's how I got all of my checkmate squares. That's how I got most of my winner's plaza. That's how I got multiple of the hippodromes, right? All of these things came from the antique dealer, and most of the antique dealer currency came from Guild Expedition and from Relics. Moving on, Terracotta Army. Terracotta Army, biggest downside of Terracotta Army is that it is just expensive to level, like really expensive to level, and you're just paying so much. I mean, that's really the bottom line. That is the biggest drawback. In fact, my wife Yogi has actually tried to convince me that if we had started over, like if we were starting now with the game in the state that it is, with power creep the way that it is, that we might not even build the Terracotta Army, because it's so easy to get attack from special buildings that the Terracotta Army, and it's just so expensive to level that we might not have built it. Now, I feel like that's a bit extreme. I don't think that it's that far expensive, because at the end of the day, it's still giving you a better attack per square than you can get from special buildings. And at a certain point, the attack per square that you get is worth more than the forge points that you have. You know, you have 40, 50, 60,000, 100,000 forge points. You would rather spend the forge points and have more attack. So it starts to become worth it. But with that said, it's the main reason, it's just the biggest thing that hurts it is that it's just so expensive to level for what it is and for what it gives you. And that's why I can't put it any higher than B. I know some people that like it more. They would put it higher, and they like the city defense that you get from it, but no. All right. The king dog of them all, the Ark. The Ark is arguably the most game-changing great building in the game. It has really revolutionized everything. And actually, I might even put Traz above it. And I know that's blasphemous. But the Ark is, in fact, the most important great building in the game for the majority of players, because it opens the door for everything. It gets you tons of forge points, more forge points per square than you can possibly shake a stick at. It prints blueprints for you. Like literally, you can just get all the blueprints that you need from Ark. And then it generates metals like crazy, right? Like you have a metal printing press to make more metals so that you can get more expansions, more real estate, and all that. Like it opens the door for recurring quest loops with Chateau. You don't even have to have a high level Chateau to really abuse the recurring quests that you can do because of Ark. Ark is the best great building in the game. It makes everything else work, and it changed the game completely. Hands down, best great building in the game. Blue Galaxy. I know a lot of you have been anxiously awaiting to see where I rate this, because I made a video about how Blue Galaxy is for suckers. And I will tell you that the game has changed a lot since that video came out. The amount of chain buildings has increased significantly. With the hippodromes, I don't even think hippodromes were out when that happened. The pirate hideout chains, the terracotta village, or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But there's a terracotta thing that you can chain and have these huge collections. And that has made it significantly easier to have a higher than 13 per charge collection. Now, just a quick rundown on this, just because I want to put some perspective to what this looks like. Let's see here. So in my main city, you look at my productions, and if you see here, I've got a 12, a few 10s, a few 8s. I don't have that many buildings that have really huge collections, and for that reason, it makes it so that Blue Galaxy really isn't that strong for me, right? Like if I'm doing the Blue Galaxy and I'm only getting, add up these and getting, let's say 55 daily forge points for leveling this up, it's really not that good for a great building that is as large as Blue Galaxy. It's 35 squares. And you have to be on the ball, right? Like if your collection gets messed up and you collect the wrong thing, there's just so many variables for it that I don't love. Now, one of the things that I did not really talk about is that it does help with the goods, right? And it does help with crowns. It does help with a lot of other things. And for that reason, I'm going to crank this thing up. I got to give it up there pretty high, but no, I got to put it at the bottom of B. So let me tell you why it ends up here. The reason why I'm putting it at the bottom of B is that, first of all, it is a very situational great building. You have to build your city around this great building in order to make it work effectively. If you don't have these great buildings with these long chains or these high forge point great buildings, then this great building isn't that useful to you. It's not that useful to me. Okay, like this doesn't really help me that much, right? Like I need the attack more than I need the forge points. And to kind of put some numbers to that, if you think about it, like, right, if you're going from level 91 to 92 for a statue of Zeus, that cost you 1,300 forge points, right? Well, at 1,300 forge points, that means that if you want to hit that in a year, because a year is my baseline, that means that you have to be getting about 3.5 forge points per day in that amount of space, right? And nobody's getting 3.5 forge points per day from 6 squares. And even if you jump up to your CDM, right? At CDM, to go up one level, right, in 365 days, you're going to need to get, let's see, it's about 5 forge points per day. Now that's a lot easier to do in 25 squares. Like 25 squares, 5 forge points a day, you got to average. Yeah, I mean, it's doable. It is doable. But it's still not, I mean, it's not scalable, right? So say you get to 100, right? Now you're looking at 2,700 forge points. And going up above 100, every level above 100 gets crazier and crazier and crazier, right? And if you look at what it costs for really high-end players to continue to level their attack buildings, the amount of forge points per square that you have to have in order to offset the cost of what it is to add an extra attack, there's just no way to match it up. I made a whole video on it. So, bottom line is that by optimizing for Blue Galaxy, which can absolutely become it can actually give you the most forge point per square of any collection building, even better than Cape, right? It means that you have to tune your city for that, which means that you have to detune your city. You have to make a sacrifice for your attack per square. And when you're making that sacrifice for attack per square, right, that means that you just don't have as much attack. And as your buildings get bigger and bigger and more expensive, forge points matter less. I'm going to go back to my main city just to kind of make the point. If you look here at where I'm at in my city, okay, and you look at the cost to level, I don't have Blue Galaxy. My Cape, you could make an argument for, right? But then you start getting into like my other buildings, and you're looking at things taking literally thousands of days to break even, right? Like literally thousands of days for it to actually be worth it for me to continue to level these buildings, right? It takes thousands of days to pay back. That's not worth leveling. Like that's just leveling for ego. That's leveling for vanity. That's not leveling for functionality, right? And if you get to the point where that's what you want to do, fine. But what you're doing is you're taking away from efficiency and functionality. Because to me, functionality is being able to fight, right? You have to fight to be a number one guild, to be a top player. And anytime that you are moving away from the functionality of fighting, that means that you are becoming less efficient. So while Blue Galaxy, if you are a non-fighter, if you are a casual fighter, you don't fight tons, Blue Galaxy can definitely make sense. But if you are a hardcore number one competitive fighter, that is your game, Blue Galaxy doesn't make sense. And that is why I put it at the bottom of B, because I could see the argument for it. You also get the goods. You can get guild goods from from Statues of Honor, from the new stuff that's coming out. I see the case for it. I'm just saying it's just not worth it, right? And if you have your Observatory, your Atomium, your Arc all leveled, then you're going to be producing the goods that you need anyway. So the guild goods that you get from Statue of Honors, not quite as strong. Okay, moving on. Habitat. I'm going to place Fat right here at the top of C. And the reason why it goes there is, it basically comes down to the Blue Galaxy versus the Habitat. This is a playstyle thing. Habitat is extremely efficient on a population per square. especially right now. Now, as time goes on, habitat is going to slowly creep down. But habitat is basically, once you level it through the sweet spot, you're looking at about 1,100 to 1,200 population per square. And as I mentioned before, being able to have in a brand new world, goods buildings, huge. Or if you are a GVG, Guild versus Guild player, and you are cranking through units left and right, or you're fighting to 100 attrition or more every day, you're going nuts, you're just burning through hundreds of units every day, that population and being able to have racks is huge. It's really, really, really underrated. With that said, most players aren't playing at that level of intensity, right? Most players aren't burning through hundreds of units a day. Most players don't fight to 100 attrition a day, or fill 20 DAs in defensive armies, that is, in Guild versus Guild. Most players aren't playing Guild versus Guild. So that's why I have it at C, because in the use that you need it, in the case that you need this is amazing, but it's niche. Kraken. Kraken I'm going to put here in C, and Kraken from a Forge Point standpoint, it's just not that good. Okay, when you look at the ROI on Kraken, it's just not good. Here you can see in one of my secondary worlds or my diamond worlds, your most efficient range for Kraken, you're looking at a year and a half, a year and 3/4, year and 7 to 8 months, whatever. You're looking at a long freaking time for this thing to ever even break even, and your daily Forge points is still only 43. So it's just, from a pure Forge Point producing standpoint, it is one of the worst buildings available in the game. All right, if you're pure Forge Point. So you do not put Kraken in for Forge Points. Do not let someone say, hey, it's Forge Points per day, put it in, you get more Forge Points. No, they're a moron. Don't do it. Okay? Kraken has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is for fighting. Now, the thing about Kraken is it's very niche, because you have so few charges that you have to collect at a time that you can make most use of those charges. And the two times that occurs, one is if you are burning out your attrition, you are ending up your attrition in guild battlegrounds, and that can help you to extend how high of attrition you can fight to. That can help you to get over that one army that you just can't beat. Certain ages, there are certain armies that are just really hard to beat, and Kraken really helps with that. Kraken's also really helpful for if you are in contemporary, getting past those 8 tank armies in Guild versus Guild. There's just a few niche cases that make Kraken really good for fighting. It does hurt that you don't have that many charges. Okay, any major fighter is going to be doing more than 20 or 30 fights in a day. So again, it is a very niche use, primarily for speed and competitive players. If you are not a highly competitive player, then Kraken really is more cosmetic for you. With that said, I love the animation for Kraken. It's definitely up there as one of my favorite great buildings as far as looks. Virgo Project. Oh my gosh, guys. This great building gives me nightmares. I remember when this was coming out in beta, and all the beta testers were saying how awful it was, except for the people who were obsessed with city defense, and they were crying about how it ruined their city defense. And Inno did literally the dumbest thing possible and made it not work for your neighborhood. So Virgo Project doesn't work for your neighborhood, which means it's useless, because only having 4 or 5 charges, or however many, it's not very many charges. It's so few charges that it's basically it's super niche. And the only time that I can see that being useful is if you are going up against these super high defense neighbors in your city. And that's it. That's the only time that would make sense. And since they got rid of that, it's useless. And on the beta forums, we kept telling Inno, this is a useless great building. It doesn't help at all. It's too niche, and they just ignored us. So with that said, it's a useless great building. It is what it is. All right, Dynamic Tower. Dynamic Tower, I'm sorry, Truce Tower now. That's the new name, Truce Tower. I made a whole video on why this is a horrible great building. And I realized that there are a lot of players who are going to say, but Pat, I have one, and it gets me this, and it gets me that, and yada yada. The bottom line is that you can just buy the goods and trade down and sell them and then buy them again and go in circles, it's way faster, right? This takes so long to accumulate the number of goods that you need for it to be useful. And if you just bought the goods with the forge points instead of waiting for the dynamic tower to pay back, I'm telling you mathematically, if you were investing real money, like if you got real money for playing this game, and I explained it to you using real monetary terms instead of video game currency, you would be like, this is a crap building, right? Like I would not go that way. But because of video game and Keurig domino effect, you think that it's a good idea. I promise you it's not. With that said, if you've already leveled it, right, don't delete it. It's still helpful, I guess, but it's not a good great building. I mean, I guess it's one of those ones that I would put D like these ones here as if you already leveled it, don't delete it. Okay. These ones down here, I would say delete it if you leveled it. I mean, that's that. All right. Last one, V1. Now V1 is basically the plunder version of your dynamic tower, and it's garbage. I'm not even going to get into it. So that's it, guys. I have spent about an hour giving you the tier list, and there's your tier list, and that worked out about right. We have right about the right amount in each tier. So what do you think? Is this tier list right? Is it wrong? Do you want to make your own tier list? If you found this video interesting, please like,